View from the Gutters, episode 69. Welcome to View from the Gutters, the comic book podcast where each episode we discuss a collected edition, trade paperback, or graphic novel, and then recommend and vote on the book for the next episode. Warning: the discussion portion of this show has massive spoilers for that book. On this episode, we discuss Avengers Forever, and to skip ahead to the recommendation section, skip to 5705.
Okay, so I'm gonna do the intro, and then I got a couple of quick announcements, and then we'll get into the book.
Why don't you do announcements and then the intro, and then we just won't talk about the book. We'll talk about socks.
We're not going to talk about socks.
It's the socks
because I'm saving all the sock-related conversation for my special two-part bonus episode on socks.
We actually could have a good sock conversation. Two of us are wearing socks. Two of us are not.
That's true. I can see.
We could have an Oxford-style debate about socks.
Isn't Oxford actually a style of sock?
Yes, there are Oxfords as well, I believe.
I thought Oxford was a style of shirt.
Or shirt.
Maybe it is. I thought it was a textile pattern in general.
Maybe.
Yeah, I did take your recommendation on rainbow sandals.
They're fucking awesome.
Yeah, I'm a little worried about how fast they're wearing out, but
they have lifetime guarantee. So,
the thing I was reading, it said they have a guarantee from mechanical defects until one of the layers wears out, whether it's the bottom layer or the top layer.
Let's see if
once one of those wears out, then they're no longer covered.
Well, I had mine for about 5 years now, and they're still going strong.
Oh, okay.
But you might walk more than Joe.
Or you just might have the kind of walk where you put more stress on a piece of footwear. I certainly know there was a period where I was blowing through shoes, one pair a year for like 3 years.
It's because you spent $20 on shoes.
15. Let's be honest. I'm not gonna blow more than $15 on a pair of shoes. What am I made of shoes?
You must like wet socks. What am I made of shoes? What do shoes grow on trees? Welcome to episode 69 of View from the Gutters.
Sure, why not?
Episode 69.
View from the Gutters, episode 69. I'm Joe Preddy.
I'm Tobiah Panchin.
I'm Brant Eddy.
And I'm Cade Reynolds.
And a couple of quick announcements before we get started. Obviously, we had a bunch of audio problems on our last episode, so I'm sorry for that. And if there are any problems on this episode, I'm sorry for that too. As you may have noticed, Chard isn't here. He had an unfortunate accident. We sent him up to Cookie Heaven.
Well,
He'll be back next week.
I think we need to be open about that.
That's how you get to Cookie Heaven.
I hadn't eaten all day.
People eat you like cookies.
He knew it. I mean, he knew it when he invited me here.
He shouldn't have been so sweet.
His corpse is still in the corner. I mean...
So yeah, in any case, I'm running the board tonight, so if there are any audio problems, that's my fault.
So direct your hate mail to that guy sitting over there at viewfromthegutters.com.
Yes, that guy over there.
Honestly, just contact a View from the Gutter.
Send it to contact@aol.com.
Announcement number 2, our contest is still ongoing. You can win a hard copy of Batman, or a hardback copy of Batman: The Long Halloween.
The Absolute Edition.
The Absolute Edition. There, if you haven't heard us talk about the contest before, there are 4 ways that you can enter. You can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or you can write us a review on iTunes. And if you do any of those things, if you do all 4 of those things, if you have already done any of those things, you can get up to 4 entries into the contest. We're going to announce a winner on June 11th. So if you want to enter, you should probably do one or all of those things by June 8th, because we're going to record the episode on June 9th where we announce the winner. And whomever wins our drawing will ship out a copy of Batman: The Long Halloween, the Absolute Edition.
It's absolutely the best.
Which apparently is the 25th anniversary of that?
No, this is the original one. I think they're redoing it for the 25th anniversary.
Or for Batman 75th?
Yeah, for...
Right, that's what I meant.
Which is funny because it's one of the only absolutes that retailed for $75. Is that tacky now that they know the price? Beat me out, Chard. Oh, shit!
Anyway.
He's not here.
So
He can do it from beyond the grave, apparently.
no. They're gonna kick him out of Cookie Heaven. He'll be back.
He'll be back.
Does that mean he'll be a cookies zombie?
God, I hope so.
Cookie zombie. That actually sounds pretty tasty.
I'm actually especially happy that you mentioned that his body was in the corner, because I didn't want to deal with the either theological or logistical implications of him returning from inside of you from heaven once he reappeared.
Well, I mean...
Because there's really only two ways to come out, right?
Well, I will pass him, and then he will rise from the remains in whatever place I happen to be when I pass him. Because sometimes I like to...
Anyway, what are we talking about?
So anyway, this week we're talking about Avengers Forever. Forever.
Yeah, this podcast will never end.
And Brent, you pitched this book, so would you like to get us started?
Yes. Pass.
Dead air.
Luckily, we can do all that in post. There is a post. I promise there's a post. There's a lot of different things I want to say about this book. Most good. Some actually not as warm and fuzzy as I might once have said.
Did you have the same problem with this that I did, which is that Kurt Busiek uses about 250% of the number of narration boxes that he reasonably should?
Well, so sort of. Not directly that issue, but...
Well, it is an exposition-heavy book.
It is an exposition-heavy book.
It is the 90s.
It also... Right. So it's, this was 1999 to 2000. And I think it is kind of it arrives on the scene during kind of a heavy transition for the comics industry and superhero comics in particular, around the use of narration bubbles. Like, thought bubbles for the most part have been kind of exorcised from the mainstream at this point, but I think you still see a lot of text exposition, even more so than you would get a few years later, for even a similar story. So yeah, there's that, and there's a few other aspects of its physical appearance and construction that I think date it, which isn't bad in of itself. It's just, it suffers from a lot of books that you would go back and read post facto, which is, oh gosh, I'd love to see this done now, and imagine how even these same creators might change it based on it being 14 years later. But there's a lot about this book that I love. It's kind of got this very core concept that I think is well carried about what the Avengers are and what the Avengers are meant to be in the Marvel Universe, which is a little bit less truth and justice in the way that the Justice League are in the DC Universe, but does still speak to them having a higher purpose, but also kind of giving that Marvel edge of, hey, these are individuals who have these different roles to play both in the Marvel Universe. They're real people, they're dynamic, and there's a lot to be said about that. I think that the art is really good. I am going to mangle his name because I can't think of a single good way to say this, and I couldn't confirm it, but I think you say this is Carlos Pacheco, because he's Spanish, so it's not a hard C, but I could be wrong. I feel like this is kind of the beginning of him really locking in his style and what we would see for the up until now. And he's been kind of all over the place. He's actually gone back and worked with Busiek quite a bit. Can't forget that Roger Stern also wrote this, and he's had a pretty great career. Also kind of diverse in the way that Kurt Busiek is. I think the story is impressive because it encapsulates a lot of different ideas, and although you don't quote-unquote need them, there are copious internal references to Marvel history in this story, to the point that, at least in the copy I have, there are reference tables at the end of each kind of chunk of books that tell you what all of the...
Yeah, there's a couple of issues, one largely dealing with Immortus and the other dealing with Kang, where it's essentially nothing but a straight narration of, here are all of the appearances of this character, or at least the early ones, that don't necessarily line up or were weird or anomalous or don't fit in with what's going on now. And we're going to kind of recalibrate, reboot, retcon all of those things in a way that makes them work consistently with everything that's going on right now. And I never really read Avengers up until like the movies started coming out and I started really getting into Marvel again. Like Avengers and Fantastic Four were not the Marvel comics that I read when I was a kid. I was very much an X-Men fan. And so coming into this, I kind of felt like that was this really heavy, bloated moment in the middle that was cleaning up a lot of stuff that I didn't know or particularly care about. So at least from my perspective, I felt like that was kind of a detriment. And part of that has to do with the fact that this does come at such a weird time in Marvel's history, because this was the very end of Bob Harris's tenure. Like right after this wraps up is when Joe Quesada takes over, and he immediately starts taking Marvel in really kind of a different direction. And a lot of the stuff that it feels like that this was trying to clean up isn't really as relevant as it was.
Actually, this is the very beginning of Joe Quesada. Joe Quesada is listed as the editor for this book, or the editor-in-chief.
At
least he is in the collected.
In the individual issues that I grabbed, Bob Harris is credited as chief with Tom Brevmort as editor.
Interesting.
It's entirely possible. I mean, the trade wouldn't have been collected.
I looked it up, and Joe Quesada took over in September of 2000.
Well, then maybe half the issues or a paucity of the issues are under Harris, and then the others are under Quesada, so Quesada's merely signing off on it. Because this trade actually came out pretty much right after the book ended. I think it's got a stamp date of 2001 on it. And, of course, the title splash pages, it's still got Brevard. It's got all the people who were doing the work at the time the book was made.
Issue 12 that I have still says Bob Harris on it.
Interesting. Well, maybe they changed on the trade. Regardless, you're right. It's happening right during a big dynamic shift. Marvel's coming out of one way and out of the other. It's funny. I wish I had done a better job of sourcing this. I would give them their due, but I ended up in a few different places on the internet because I did some research on this title. And one of the comments that I ran into was that this book's also surprising because given its weight, its scope, its feel, and its reception at the time, this book is not particularly well remembered in the way that like Avengers Disassembled and a lot of the Bendis stuff that's been done in the last 15 years, along with all the things that followed it, as far as being a major paradigm shift in the Marvel Universe into the Avengers universe. And it really was. This book cleans a lot of stuff up that was inconsistent about Avengers history. It actually...
But it wasn't really required reading at the time, such as Disassembled was.
Right. But it still, it introduced a character. It does, in some senses, set the ground for what should come soon, because a couple of the characters in this book are future versions of people in the relatively near future. So it does kind of at least offer some signposts to have previous or following writers aspire to if they wanted to kind of tie into it.
Songbird in the Thunderbolts is a great example.
Yeah.
Came after this.
Which, of course, this is one of the reasons I love Kurt Busiek is he'd created the Thunderbolts.
Yeah, the Thunderbolts had already been a thing at that point. They happened right after
but
Onslaught.
Songbird wasn't in them until after this book.
No, she was a founding member of the Thunderbolts.
Yeah, Screaming Mimi.
Yeah.
But she's never been in the
right.
Avengers. She's come close, but never been in the Avengers, and I've always wanted them to finally kind of tie that off. And
the Captain Marvel who was in this book is Genus Vell, who is dead or retroactively never existed or something.
Yeah.
After this series, Peter Allen David did a really good Captain Marvel series that ended up with the entire universe being destroyed and rebuilt at least a couple of times.
Right.
It was a good series, but it ended up with him being essentially taken off the table as far as the Marvel Universe is concerned, and his sister, Phyla Vell, taking over as Captain Marvel.
Right.
So, in order to get him back on the table and into the Avengers, that would take a lot of work at this point.
Right. A lot of work, really. This is a comic book universe we're talking about.
Oh, sure. I mean,
just
especially
go,
with the cosmic
this happened. It takes somebody writing something down. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but Phyla Vell has been...
Well, okay, let me put it to you this way. Carol Danvers is Captain Marvel.
And she's going to be Captain Marvel for the foreseeable future.
If you want Genus Vell to be Captain Marvel on the Avengers, you have to do something with Carol Danvers. You have to get her out of the way. You have to bring Genus Vell back into existence, essentially. Like, get him the Negabands back. He's bonded to Rick Jones again. Like, there are a number of continuity shifts that you have to do in order to rearrange that.
The point that I'm making is that, though, that is how a rational thinking person would do it. And we're dealing with comic book writers who don't have the best track record for rationality, all right?
Well, I think neither of the companies would do something that extreme right this minute.
No, I don't think so either. And I'm a huge supporter of the Carol Danvers Captain Marvel. I think it's a great title. And I think Kelly Sue DeConnick is doing a great job on it. And I'm really pleased that the reception it's gotten because we need more female superheroes. I love the female legacy that's going on with her and Miss Marvel, and I think that's good stuff. And I'd like to see more of it. I'd like to see more of it everywhere. I think I agree with you. This book, you were the one that Brant was the one that lent me this book in the first place when I was getting back into comics when we met almost a decade ago, and I read it and I just. Thinking back to it, I was like, oh, I loved it. I ate it up. And reading it this time, there definitely are some things that are interesting to me to go back and kind of look at. I don't know that they're necessarily good or bad. It does definitely suffer from that 90s, like this is an internal monologue. This is a narration. It's an external manifestation of my internal monologue. But there's, at certain points, Busiek kind of switches between the two, which was a little kind of jarred me a little bit. It was a little jarring.
Yeah, I mean, ostensibly most of the series is being narrated by Libra, but there are definitely moments where it really doesn't feel like he's talking. It feels like an omniscient narrator is just telling you a thing.
But I really, reading this, the thing I was most immediately struck with was its similarity in some senses to Crisis on Infinite Earths, even though it came out, this is like almost 15 years later, in which this is an effort to take something and to basically tell a story in which this kind of house cleaning is done, and when you're done you have a much more neat continuity than you did before. And that is a massive undertaking, and there's going to be things that you can't necessarily address with the same, in the best possible way, right? Like, this comes from an era, and we've talked about this a little bit, but, there used to be a lot more to comic books. You were paying for, 25, 26 pages, but you were getting something that took you 20 minutes to read, 30 minutes to read. Like, these were dense narratives that were going on. And, you don't really see that a lot anymore. They're much more sparse.
Their decompression has become the thing in modern comics.
Yeah, which I don't necessarily know is a good thing. It's it'll be interesting to see where that takes, because although it's nice to see a story kind of build up and take shape over several issues, I think it's also nice to just kind of get one issue, one story, and be done with it. I've been reading a lot of Silver Age stuff lately, and it's wacky and ridiculous, but it's also really beautifully approached, because it's seriously you get the issue and you get the story in that issue. Having said that, though, I still love this book. I love that it kind of peels away. It really gets at what I find is interesting about the Avengers, which is that they're so do or die. They're really gonna. They're not concerned with the odds. They're not concerned with, how many enemies they have to defeat. They come from a place where they're like, we will do what we set out to do, even if it means we're all gonna die. Even if it's hopeless, we're still gonna go.
We're Avengers. We're heroes. We will do whatever it takes to save as many people as we can possibly save.
Absolutely, right? And they're not concerned with glory or anything other than just being heroes.
Unless you're Yellow Jacket.
Okay, unless you're Yellow Jacket. Which is one of the more interesting parts of this book, because Hank Pym has a very fractured continuity, let's say. And he's been honestly, 1,000 different heroes.
I was hoping for a little more interaction between Hank Pym and Yellow Jacket. And really, they spent a lot of effort throughout this story keeping the two of them apart.
Well, I think
I think that was smart.
Yeah, I agree. I don't necessarily know that because Hank Pym is an interesting character to me just simply because he has been through so much and every major thing in his life has caused him to kind of, like look at himself. He's
a man who has constantly reinvented himself
and so,
over and over and over again. He's been Ant-Man. He's been Giant Man. He's been Yellow Jacket.
He's Hank
Pym.
I mean,
just Hank Pym.
There's one more in there, isn't there? One more? Anybody? Bueller?
Wait.
Bueller?
I always think of Hawkeye when he was Goliath.
Hawkeye was Goliath, but
and rolling that in there, but obviously that's Clint Barton.
Well,
but yeah, I do feel like there's one other Hank Pym identity.
There's one other Hank
Pym,
isn't there?
So which one's realistic?
Ant-Man, Giant Man, Yellow Jacket, just himself as like scientist dude.
I think that's all of them.
Is that? Okay. If we're wrong, let us know. But it feels.
Was he one of the Beatles?
No, I don't think so. That was George Ringo.
I knew you were
going to
Oh, you served it up to me. Come on. These are the jokes. People. Tip your waitress. I think it makes sense to me because Giant Man Hank Pym is much more involved in being an Avenger than Yellow Jacket is. Yellow Jacket, the whole point of Yellow Jacket was he was emotionally unstable. He was dangerously narcissistic.
Well, they were taking him for...
No, he was completely unaware that he was Hank Pym.
They were taking him for a villain turn.
Yeah, or at least a more anti-hero. I don't know villainous.
Well, I always got the sense that they were essentially setting him up to turn into a villain and then kind of backed off from that, and we're like, no.
Yeah, it was more like I never really necessarily. I mean, and of course the tone of that stuff back then is now it reads almost like cartoonishly dickwad as opposed to necessarily even approaching villain. But the tone at the time was a little bit different, which is actually one of the things I think Busiek does really well is that these people are from different times, and I don't know how close you guys tracked some of the dialogue, but like Clint Barton says some things that you're like,
no, totally.
And so does Yellow Jacket. Like the turns of phrase, you're like, okay, that was 1978. Like, jeez,
absolutely. No, I think the Busiek does. I've always found Busiek to be a very good plotter. Like he goes into a story knowing what the plot beats are and a good understanding of the characters, and I think that really shines in here. Like, I think Kane is a really interesting character. I mean, think about it, right? He's running around there, kind of in and out of time, just waging battles to win or lose. Who cares, right? Like,
actually, it's interesting. I don't think I've ever read a Kang story before this, and reading it, especially at the end where he's like physically struggling against turning into Immortus, it reminded me of two things. One is a movie from, I think, the 70s that Joe and I watched called Gandahar, The Light Years, which, if you've never seen it, you should check it out because it is weird.
Speak of that again.
It is weird as fuck. But more so, it reminded me of a Robert Heinlein short story called By His Bootstraps, where literally it starts out with this guy. He's writing a thesis about, like his graduate thesis about time travel. And his future self shows up and is like, there's a time hole right behind you. You should go check it out. And so he ends up jumping through time, and he ends up in the far future. And there's this old guy there named Dictor, who's the ruler. And he's like, all the humans in this time are weak-willed and subservient, and I'm the boss here. If you want to join me, that's cool. Like, you can be my lieutenant or whatever. And the guy goes and he has a few adventures or whatever. And he's like, that guy's kind of a dick. I know, I'll go back in time to before he got here, set myself up as the leader, and then when he shows up, I can be like, oh, I'm already in charge. And so he goes back and he does that, and then his past self shows up, and he's like, oh crap, I was that guy all along.
Dun, dun, dun.
Right, and so it's got this temporal loop thing where he's like trying to fight his future self, even though he doesn't necessarily realize that. And I really got that strong sense from Kang and Immortus in this story, to the extent that I feel like that's got to be like an intentional reference.
I mean, I feel as if it's not impossible. I mean, I think that...
I mean, this is a very well-known Heinlein short story.
Yeah, and I mean, Heinlein wasn't like, some kind of like crank in a basement churning out things that he handed out on the street corner.
Well, I mean, Kurt Busiek is a well-read person.
Yeah, and I mean, I wouldn't be surprised at all if that influenced it a little bit. I've always been really kind of intrigued by the idea that Kang was kind of bouncing around out there, but he knew that after everything, he would go to this place and become Immortus. And I always thought that was kind of a cool thing.
Well, see, that's the thing, is that I got the sense that, like, he didn't know, like, he hates Immortus. And he's like, how's it going to happen? What's the thing that's going to turn me into him? And how do I subvert that? Like, how do I stave off that moment?
Oh, no, absolutely. It's not something he's looking forward to, but he's aware. He doesn't know the particulars of it, but he's aware that at the end, at some point he stops being Kang the Conqueror and becomes Immortus. And this idea that, like, I've always kind of fascinated by this idea that, like, between 2 seconds, when you're talking about time travel, right, there's an infinity of seconds, right, because you could just pop back in. Mm-hmm. And so it always seemed kind of weird to me that, like, clearly Kang becoming Immortus is inexorable, and yet he's really got, like, all the time he wants in between those two things, right? But then you remember that he's kind of aging. That's kind of what's interesting to me, is that Kang is actually aging towards becoming Immortus. So,
well, and he also talks about, like, he developed the ability to send his mind into other bodies.
Other bodies, yeah.
And so he could sustain his life for as long as he wanted to at that point. But that he actively chose, like, I'm not going to do that anymore because it made it too easy.
Yeah. Which I love it. I love it when people are like, this is clearly the easiest way to do this thing. I'm not going to do that. It's too easy.
Well, I just think it's interesting because the thing that he decides upon to, like, keep himself as Kang, because, like, he needs that challenge, he needs to be a conqueror, and when they're, like, he knows that he can't really lose, like, he loses all interest, but at the same time, like, that also brings him closer to becoming Immortus because he is getting older now.
No, absolutely, the thing that he's running from, he can't be who he truly is without moving closer to what he hates the most.
So, Cade, you've been pretty quiet thus far. What did you think about Avengers Forever?
I liked it. I really liked the art. I mean, this was a very 90s book to me. Like, when I was reading this, I was like, oh man, I remember this time. Like, I like time travel paradoxes are always weird to me. Like, it takes a lot to make them good, I feel.
Yeah, I'm always incredibly trepidatious about time travel stories.
Yeah, which is I think one of the reasons I have, some problems with Jonathan Hickman is because I don't feel that he always does it. I mean, I've definitely liked some of his stuff.
Well, I don't think that he necessarily always does time travel stories. He just shows things to you, like, really out of order.
Well, no, but I mean, he does do time travel stories, and
yeah, sometimes.
And he does do them a lot. I mean, I don't want to say all his stories are, because I've definitely read some that aren't. But, sometimes his time travel stories, the ones that he does, don't really click well for me. I feel that there are questions, or rather, they bring up questions and then don't actually answer them. Whereas this one gave you answers to non-questions, I guess is what it is. It's like Kurt Busiek shows you time travel in a way, like, you don't necessarily, you can go along with it and not see those questions showing up as obviously. And I really like, I mean, there were things about it that I thought were weird, but at the same time there were things about it that I thought were cool. I really loved the whole thing where they find Kang in the Old West, and they were like, "Wait, no, we can't fight him. This is a thing for the future
It's
Avengers
the wrong
to
Kang."
do." Yeah, and I thought that was really cool. I thought that was a take that you don't normally see, because normally in time travel stories, you're going back there for a reason, and this time you go back there and it's like, oh, we specifically don't want to do what we came here to do, so now let's avoid everything. Like,
No, my big problem with time travel stories is they usually just end up introducing like a whole ton of plot holes or just not making sense one way or another. And this is interesting as a time travel story because it's like all it does is go back and fix all of the plot holes from all of the time travel stories that preceded it.
Exactly.
Which is an interesting thing, and I think it does a good job of patching up all of those holes, at least as far as you can, although a lot of times it came down to, oh, this thing that I said that didn't make any sense, well, that was me lying intentionally to misdirect somebody.
Well, and I think that's...
Which is, like, I mean, it's a little bit frustrating as a story going, okay, are you lying to me now? How much of what we're seeing right now is an intentional misdirection?
Well,
once you introduce that concept of the unreliable narrator, like, you open up this entire rabbit hole of what is real and what isn't. And untangling that can be incredibly laborious and leave you with no real good answers.
Yeah, but I don't necessarily think... I think one of the things that's interesting to me is that I don't really have the same problem with time travel stories as you guys do, because largely it's used as a device with which to further just what's going on. I mean, I agree that it can sometimes lead to plot holes, but I believe that I think that comes not necessarily from using time travel as a device, but anytime you try to be overly elaborate, it's very easy to kind of get into these convoluted things.
Oh no, absolutely.
That that's like the Joker's plan in The Dark Knight is one of the things that really bugs me, because when you start to like really think about what he would have had to have prior knowledge of to do that, that whole plan just falls apart. But if you don't look at it, if you're just kind of like, okay, I'm watching a movie, it's cool, whatever, then you can kind of be like, oh, all right, that's pretty crazy. That's a pretty good plan.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that it's something that is exclusive to time travel, but oftentimes when a less experienced writer or even somebody who's just having a bad day sits down to write a time travel story, it's not always cohesive. I think that Kurt Busiek, toes that line very well. I think he wrote a very good... Like I said, like, usually there are questions that are brought up, and this isn't just time travel stories. There are lots of ways that this can happen.
I think that's kind of my point, is that's a convention. Just if you're a poor writer or you did not plot your story well, you're gonna have plot holes, and depending on the size of that plot hole, you're gonna maybe miss like conveying information to your audience.
It seems like time travel stories are especially prone to those kinds of plot holes. Like they're hard to write.
Yeah,
they are.
No, they are hard to write, but I think largely what happens is we need a way to explain this. We'll just use time travel. And then it becomes about that, where I really wonder if like a lot of the more poorly written, especially with movies, I really wonder how many of them started out as specifically like time travel movies, and how many of them were like, we need to explain this one thing because it's, like really important to the plot. So we'll just introduce time travel, but that'll like kind of ruin all these other plot beats that we have. Because I agree with you guys. Like,
it's amazing what the original first draft of Back to the Future looked like.
Oh God, it's amazing what the first draft of a lot of fucking things looked like. But that's. I mean,
originally it was a romance.
Well, I mean, originally Ronald Reagan was going to be fucking Rick Blaine in Casablanca. You guys go out there and win one for the Gipper. Fuck that. That would have been awful. But I think this is what kind of shines for me about this, is that Busiek really he knew what he wanted to do with this, and he sat down with that very deliberate intention.
Yeah, this obviously must have had he had to spend a lot of time figuring out like exactly what all the points were that he wanted to hit and how he wanted to stitch them all together.
Which is why I think this is textbook time travel, and especially for like the time, I think, where Marvel was not financially in the best place it had ever been. In fact, a lot of the reason that Fox owns the X-Men rights and the Fantastic Four rights right now, and that Sony owns the Spider-Man rights, although I'm not sure if that happened around the same time, was that Marvel was basically going bankrupt.
They weren't
90s.
Basically going bankrupt. They went bankrupt.
They went bankrupt.
That's part of the reason why Bob Harris left as editor-in-chief.
Yeah, because he drove it into the ground.
So hard.
Cough.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers
crossed. DC 2016.
The hilarious thing to me is that Disney now owns Marvel, and Michael Eisner, who was the CEO or the president of Disney for a long time, did the same fucking thing to Disney. Almost drove it into the ground. Not quite as bad, but there are so many great beats in this story. Agents of Atlas, which we're not yet the Agents of Atlas.
Yeah, I pulled my Agents of Atlas book off the shelf. So when the team goes back to the 1950s and they run into Marvel Boy and the Human Robot and Gorilla Man and Venus and 3D Man.
3D Man.
That was actually a team from a issue of What If the Avengers were formed in the 1950s. And that team was the team that shows up in this book. Like, they're in that What If alternate Marvel timeline. And then like 5 or 6 years later, Jeff Parker did an Agents of Atlas book where he was bringing together those same characters who were pre-Marvel Universe Marvel characters from when I think they were called Timely Comics.
Yeah, I think that sounds right.
And they put them together along with a character that they named, Jimmy Woo, who doesn't appear in this book. And they reform like this Agents of Atlas team of all of these 1950s Marvel characters.
Yeah, which is, I think, a neat call out to that era. And to that particular story. I mean, for him to kind of play around with this idea, you basically...
I think it's always cool when they like pick up something from like some old What If issue and they're like, hey, this cool idea. Let's play with this some more.
Because there's also references made to Earth X, and that when old Rick and new Rick, young Rick, call, they're like, oh, well, we've got Avengers 2.
And you get that huge splash of like every Avenger ever.
It's great. You get Captain America from Earth X. You get Girl Thor. You get Daredevil.
You get Spider-Man 2099.
Spider-Man
which, I mean, there's never been an Avengers 2099. So who the fuck knows when that's supposed to happen?
Oh God, let's do it. Why isn't it? I want it now.
Yes. Maybe with the reboot of Spider-Man 2099 coming, they will tie him into the Avengers.
Yeah,
somehow.
maybe he'll join the Avengers in the present day. You don't know.
No.
That could totally be a thing.
I think it's
Holy
really...
shit. Mind blown. It's happening. Kurt Busiek prophesized it.
It's, he prophesies as much. He is our prophet. Him and Mark Waid. I just think it's a really interesting idea to take something like we saw in Crisis on Infinite Earths, where you were doing this for a whole universe and 50 years of continuity, and to take that, I mean, a little less than that, like 47 or something, but and to just apply this to this one little corner of this universe and just be like, I'm just going to clean up this little bit.
Yeah, the more that you mention it, the more that I agree with you. It really does kind of have a Crisis on Infinite Earths vibe, especially the part where you've got multiple versions of the same character interacting together.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they're not trying to fix plot holes of a universe. They're trying to fix plot holes of a team.
Just this one little
corner of continuity. There is a certain extent to which Avengers really is like the core of the Marvel universe.
I mean, yeah.
Well, for a long time, like you had the Avengers and you had the Fantastic Four and you had the X-Men, and those were kind of like the three nexuses that everything else that kind of revolves around. And Spider-Man too.
You had the first family, that's the Fantastic Four. And then the Avengers, and then I think the X-Men. And those, each represented different
Yeah, the
things,
X-Men
you know?
came after Spider-Man because Spider-Man was touted as like the first teenage Marvel
No, that's
hero.
fair.
But I mean, the X-Men launched a few years later. I think like 71 or something.
No, the X-Men were 60-something.
68.
I want to say 66.
Okay.
It might have been even before.
So that's
I don't
3
know.
years after Spider-Man.
You have the internet at home. Look it up.
Yeah, we don't need to tell you that. But it's the same basic ideal where you're kind of like, I want to tell these stories using these versions of these characters, and I can do that. Like this is kind of exercises. It's Kurt Busiek really exercising kind of the utmost tool you have as a writer, which is knowledge of the medium, understanding of the characters and their history, and a clear, thought-out idea of what story you want to tell. And when you have those, I think you get really strong narratives. Because even for all kind of the little problems, like, this is an incredibly dense book. There is a lot of narration going on.
Dense.
There is a lot of text box narration going on, which is definitely kind of its time. But I don't think you can deny that this is a really strong narrative. And it's very driven by one central idea.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's kind of unfortunate that it came out when it did, because there was that change of editorial at Marvel, and a lot of what they were doing, like, suddenly wasn't really relevant, and they started going in a very different direction. And this work feels kind of dated to me, especially because it's got that, like, late 90s, early computer coloring.
No, absolutely.
That just everything from, like, 1999 to about 2001... like has this kind of, I don't know, it feels really old to me for some reason. It doesn't look right.
It feels slick in the way that the early like computer
it reminds me of like computer like CG from 1996 that you'd see on like Hercules the Legendary Journeys, and where you just look at it and it looks like it's made from like extruded plastic.
Yeah, and I mean there really is this kind of like this portion when they left 4-color and started moving more into digital color, but you didn't really have access to the technology that we have now that makes...
And people weren't experienced with doing it.
Yeah, exactly. So
but in any case, I mean, I was saying, I feel like it's unfortunate that it kind of landed where it did, because it's a really good work. Like, it was well thought out. It's obvious that a lot of effort went into it, and it's unfortunate because it's not really as relevant as it might otherwise be. Like, I think that you could jump onto Avengers at or around Disassembled and read from there and really have a pretty good idea of what's going on and not necessarily have to like delve back into stuff. And you might read the Infinity Gauntlet or, I don't know, Operation Galactic Storm or whatever, or the Kree Skrull War.
Right.
And like, you can pick up those big Avengers events and read them and appreciate them for what they are without really having to go like, well, this thing happened and this thing happened in these two random issues of the Avengers, and I don't understand how those line up.
Yeah.
Like, this was really trying to like clean things up kind of in that Crisis way for a period that people really don't pay as much attention to.
Yeah.
Anymore.
Well, yeah, and it was trying to set a direction too, which is a shame that it didn't come out when there was kind of, I mean, this...
like if this had come out 2 years later, I think it would have been a very different work, and I think it would have had a lot more lasting impact.
Well, it would have been the flagship book that it deserves to be, rather than kind of something that...
a side story.
Yeah, I mean, which unfortunately I don't necessarily think it's a side story, but I don't think that it had the effect on the universe that it could have.
Yeah.
It
definitely feels like it's trying to set up sort of not exactly a status quo, but trying to go like, here's everything that came before, and now we're going to kind of go in this direction. Like, we've set up some future Avengers. Watch out for them to join the team.
Yeah.
That they never, ever did.
And the interesting thing to me is that it references Earth X by having those characters in that splash page, which has turned out to be a much more...
lasting and influential.
Which has had a lot more lasting influence on the modern Marvel universe. And I think they're both, I think this, along with Earth X, are works that not only stand on their own, but represent the same kind of thoughtfulness and attentiveness to detail that make for really strong comic narratives. You know, I as much as I am a fan of kind of having fun and like reading comics that, you know, you can just kind of read and put down and you're like, that was great. Yeah, I totally thought that was awesome. I think that it's important that there are people out there like Kurt Busiek that are doing this, even though I'm not sure. I think he's doing more. He's doing Astro City now, which is fan-fucking-tastic.
Well, it's critically acclaimed.
Yeah, it is critically acclaimed, and there's a reason for it. And
so it's still going on?
I think so. It goes away and comes back. He tells different arcs with it. But it's definitely him kind of, as I think, like off the hook. He's beholden only to himself. And so he's able to explore the things he really, and you can tell he's a man that likes superheroes as opposed to somebody like Garth Ennis, who has said that he doesn't care for superheroes at all because he has a really good understanding of them. And I think that shines through in this. This is a great superhero story for me. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
I really,
it also reminded me a little bit of Cosmic Odyssey.
Yeah.
Just in kind of the way that it's like not super connected to anything else that was going on at the time.
Yeah,
like,
and that's the only
it's this
reason I called
adventure
it
that
a
goes
side
off in
story.
space. And it's this team that's not used to working together, and they do this thing, and maybe there are some consequences that come out of that, but it's kind of like its own thing by itself.
Yeah.
Like these weren't issues of Avengers. This was its own miniseries.
Yeah, this was its own limited series. Mm-hmm. And I think for me,
you didn't need to read it to stay with what was going on at the time.
No, you didn't. It was, and once again, we talk a lot about events and the way events are done. And this is textbook. This is a great example of like, this contains everything you need to know about the event. It does it concisely. And at the end, for me, this book is all summed up by one page. I think it's one page. And it's the page where he explains why everybody is there. Why it was the Cap from that specific time. Because if it had been another one, he would have been too by the book. He would have been too
He would have taken
predictable.
charge.
He would have taken charge, and he would have been too predictable. Janet Van Dyne had to have been there because she was at a place where she had just started leading the Avengers, and she was more kind of fluid and unpredictable. I mean, like, for him to kind of get that page to me is just a big old sloppy kiss for the reader, because it's like, you've stuck with me. Here's the payoff. Here's where you get to see
and I'm
why
glad
I made
that they
these
did
choices.
that.
Oh,
like,
absolutely.
it would have been easy to go like, well, these were just the characters that I wanted to use,
Yeah.
and so that's why they're there, and like there's no explanation ever given.
Yeah, and that's I really feel like that's missing from a lot of stories of this type, is the explanation for why these particular people were chosen for this particular mission. And the fact that we got that.
The betrayal of Yellow Jacket's another example.
Yeah, exactly. It's just I really think that that's a powerful way to connect with the reader. It's a powerful way to kind of thank them for sticking along with you. And it just it feels good when you close the book and you're like, yeah, it makes sense. Like that, I can totally understand why that needed to happen in that way. Because one of the things that I think is most frustrating for all readers is when you close a book and you go, I don't understand why that needed to be that way. Because I think that...
Which happens with a lot of books.
I think it happens, yeah. I mean...
I think that's entirely fair.
Yeah. So...
did we have anything else that we wanted to say about the book, Cade?
I am really hoping that Future's End does for the universe what this did.
That would certainly be nice if true.
I'm hoping.
You can hear the dubiousness in my voice.
Well,
yeah, I'm hoping.
Well, you know,
keep hoping.
I think that
one of us has to have hope.
One of the cool things about comic books is that it may not be now, but people read this, and people are still reading it. I'm pretty sure Marvel just reprinted it.
The edition I read, I actually read the recently re-released digital edition.
Yeah, so I mean, which
didn't have the same, like the same back matter and timetables that the old ones did. But yeah, no, they're absolutely still releasing this. It's still getting into
And so
new readers.
people are still reading this.
Well,
And
it's a good Kang story.
Oh yeah, and Kang is great. I'm sorry, I love Kang. I know I've said that already, but his name is fucking Kang. It's the sound that it makes when
it's
you
not
hit
just
somebody
Kang.
with a frying pan.
It's Kang the Conqueror.
Yeah, I mean he's just like
He's like, what does he do?
he conquers shit. His name is Kang, and he's here. He was a fucking pharaoh. Although I will say that I was a little bummed out that I didn't get to see him with the cool Kang weapons fighting the Brood like he does in Shield.
Yeah.
But which
Also,
is a
I thought it was
throwback to our Shield
interesting
episode.
that he had time spheres in his time traveling Sphinx.
Well, yeah,
Because that feels like a Rip Hunter thing, like the time sphere.
well, they're chronospheres.
Oh, chronospheres,
They're not
excuse
time
me.
spheres.
Totally
Completely
different.
different architecture.
No, that's my fault. That's 100% different. Trademark.
I'm chiding you for a second. Okay, chiding over.
Okay.
Yeah, this book is very 90s in all of the good ways that you can be from the 90s.
It's very 1999.
yeah. And
Like, I feel like the 90s have happened. Like, by this point, we've had Earth X. We've had Kingdom Come. People are kind of like, okay, the 90s was a thing that happened. We, like, got way too fucking just, like, strung out on cocaine and hookers, and we fucked everything up. And the industry burned down. Let's move on from that, and
We need
let's
to
rebuild.
rebuild.
Like, we need to rebuild it.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And this is trying to rebuild things.
Yeah. And I think it does a cool job, man. I mean, I really like the art. I think it's distinctive.
Yeah,
It's definitely worth the read.
Yeah.
some of the pencils are amazing. Some of those panels are just, they flow very well. The art does.
Yeah, I actually do want to take a minute to talk about this because one of the things that strikes me as so kind of modern about this book is there are a lot of incredible panels with it that really play with perspective. And so you'll have characters upside down. One of my least favorite things in comic books is when I have to move the book to read it.
Yeah.
And there may be people that like it, and that's fine. It's just me because I'm kind of lazy. But this...
I just don't like it because I read a lot of comics digitally.
Yeah, and if
And
you
that means
turn
that I have
your
to, like-
tablet, the image moves.
Yeah,
and
I
you're
turn
like,
my
"Wait, no."
tablet and the image moves, and I'm like, oh crap, and I have to realign it and hit the lock thing and rotate it again.
That's also hashtag first world problems. True. We think we've all experienced that. I totally read The Private Eye in the wrong orientation. I found it much more enjoyable when I read it in landscape. But Carlos Pacheco's art, I'm going to go with Brand's pronunciation of it because he seems to know what he's talking about, usually.
It looks like Pacheco to me.
Well, but he was making the argument that he's from Spain and it's a soft C as opposed to a hard C,
Okay.
which is more of an argument than you're offering me. I'm just saying.
No, that's fair.
Uh,
I'm very good at butchering people's names.
Which is
It's a talent.
Which is the other reason I'm going to go with Brand on this one.
I think everybody is good at butchering people's names. if
As
they're from
somebody
different
whose name
countries.
often gets butchered, I'm actually pretty good at getting. I have a good feel for names because my name often gets butchered, which is funny because it's 5 letters.
Yeah, it's actually funny. I found an old phone of mine and I looked through the address book, and in that your last name has like 7 or 8 letters.
Yeah, it's just
It's like Peretti, like almost like it's a Beretta.
yeah, and that's one of many that I get. But
I think I had 2 R's, 2 T's, 2 E's, and like 6 I's.
Yeah, that sounds about right. That is actually how I spell my name, is with 6 I's, because I really want to impact that that E sound at the end. That's not true at all.
Pretty?
Pretty. But I think
You think?
Pacheco's art comes out of this style where people were starting to break out of that, like, everybody wants to look like Jim Lee phase of Marvel Comics, where I think, like, everybody wanted to look like Jim Lee or Lee Field or Silvestri or those guys that had left for Image, and they were hugely influential at that time. But Pacheco's art really feels unique to me. I mean,
This is one of the best looking Captain Americas. He's not super buff.
I mean, he's not super buff. He doesn't have the butt chest.
I'm just going to throw it out there because I opened to the part towards the end where like all the different Avengers are showing up. And I love the fact that they have some of the Squadron Supreme in here, like Dr. Spectrum.
Right.
And there's somebody who I'm assuming is the Falcon, but he looks like Bloodwind from the JLA.
Oh, Jesus.
I don't know.
Also, Guardians of the Galaxy were in this.
They were. It's true.
True, and they're like a years ago iteration.
Yeah, well, there was the original
It was
iteration.
the future Avengers.
Well, they
Avengers of Space.
Guardians of the Galaxy first showed up in the late '60s, like '68.
Yeah.
As the Avengers of the 31st century.
Yeah.
And those were who the Guardians of the Galaxy were up through the '90s. And it was only in Annihilation that they rebooted Guardians of the Galaxy as the current team with Star-Lord that are going to be in the movie. So these were the only Guardians of the Galaxy at the time. Like, that's who they were.
No, and they were, Avengers of the future. It's like the Legion of Superheroes is the future of the JLA.
Yeah.
It's true.
It is true.
True facts.
I also saw Ms. Marvel and Spider-Woman in there. Like, there's one really big splash page with the two of them fighting.
Yep.
And it made me wonder exactly like when those two characters really came back into the mainstream at Marvel. Because I know they were both big in like the 2004 forward period.
Yeah, because that version of Spider-Woman is one of the headlining members of the new Avengers when it was rebooted in 2004.
Well, Jessica Drew.
Yeah, but had she actually been on the Avengers at that point? I didn't know for sure.
No,
I'd have to look it up.
I don't believe so. No, she was a Hydra agent for a while.
But was Ms. Marvel around at that point?
Yeah.
Okay.
She was because,
like I said, I did not read Avengers for a long time.
Like her and Rogue were basically battling for Rogue's powers in the late 80s in X-Men.
Carol Danvers was binary for a long time, and she was out in space.
Yeah, and then I
wasn't sure when
she was back.
Yeah, I wasn't sure exactly when she came back and became Ms. Marvel again.
Yeah, unfortunately, as you may have noticed, our resident Marvel historian, since Mannix isn't here, Brent had to.
Yeah, he had a domestic issue that he had to go take care of, so he had to abscond.
But he told us to tell you all that he hates you and he's not as good as us. That's not true at all. He didn't say that.
Yeah, but he thought it real loud.
He thought it really loudly.
Anyway, do we want to move on to recommendations?
We can, if everybody's done, yeah.
I feel like I've said everything that I can meaningfully say about this.
Oh, there was one thing I wanted to touch on when we were talking about the pencils. There were some panels in which two panels next to each other, he did some interesting things with art where sometimes the characters were facing away from the previous panel, even though they were not the same scene. And it kind of gave a different emotionally detached, like it kind of disconnects you from a moment versus the panels where even when they're not interconnected, the characters are facing each other.
No, absolutely.
And it was something I used to notice a lot back in the early 2000s that people would do that.
Well, I think
because it was a different way to relate. Like, shit, my mind just went blank. It's
perspective. It's the same way that he handles Giant Man and the Wasp, who I think are characters that are very hard to draw because it's very easy to lose perspective of their size. Like, Giant Man is giant. I want to know that he's giant. I want him doing giant type things.
I know that this is a digression, but anytime that I talk about panels in that way, it always makes me think of, and I can't remember which Kurosawa movie it is, which upsets me. It might be Ron, but it's the scene where it's a husband and wife, and they're sitting side by side, and they're not looking at each other. They're both just staring straight ahead, straight at the camera. And it's just this one fixed shot where they're talking to each other, but they're both staring straight ahead, not looking at each other even a little bit. And it's a really powerful shot. And when, as a kid, my dad got that movie on VHS, and it was changed from widescreen to full screen, they cut it up. So instead of being one static shot, it was cutting back and forth between the two of them. And it really just fucked up like the ambiance and the impact of that shot.
Yeah.
And that's what I think of anytime that like people talk about panel work in that way of like, how did the way that the panels are arranged make you feel about that scene?
Yeah, well, it changes the emotion.
Well, yeah, you're conveying emotion, especially when there are some very emotionally charged moments in this, and the way that the panels are handled, I think, really has an impact, as it should, as it is designed to.
Absolutely.
Which I think is just more proof that this book was thought out. You know, the Marvel method is not necessarily the most conducive.
Well, I don't think Marvel has done the Marvel method for a long time. I mean, that was the Jack Kirby Stan Lee
doing
method.
it. I'm not sure about that. I know that they were doing it, and they were doing it at least until the 80s.
Well, yeah, the 80s, maybe even into the 90s.
Into the 90s. I mean, they may not be doing it now, but I wouldn't be surprised.
I would be surprised if they had used the Marvel method like as their like how like this is how Marvel comics are written in 15 years, maybe even 20. I mean, sure, there's probably like a team now or now and then who are like, we want to do it in this way because that's like how we work.
Oh, that's fair.
But as
and this was
as the house style, let's say.
I mean, the chances, though, that Busiek and Pacheco were working together in the same room, in the same building, even, are very slight.
Oh, yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Just not the way. And so it may not be the exact Marvel method, but it's still...
Well, the Marvel method was... You have a plot that's written, that's scripted.
Yeah.
Then the artist draws the plot, and then it goes back to the writer to write all the dialogue.
Yeah.
And the dialogue is not written until after the artwork is done.
No, yeah,
in the Marvel
absolutely.
method. And I'd be very surprised if 95% of people didn't use that anymore.
Actually, this is how the myth that Hank Pym is a wife beater got started.
Yep, absolutely.
It was not originally meant to be that, and
the artist was changed at the last moment.
Yeah,
and they like radically misinterpreted what had been written.
Yeah,
and then it was too late to change it.
It was
I think we talked about that like way back.
We may have, but
we did once. I don't think we told the full story, but yeah, we have talked about it before.
But I mean, it's difficult to. I can see how it would be difficult to have something between two people that are kind of talking to each other because they didn't have access to the, like now with Skype and stuff, you can be like, I'm just going to email you this file and you can check out how it looks. Back then, it would have been much more difficult to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I just think that this book comes together to speak of an excellent collaboration and a really just well put together piece. So
absolutely,
this is it. And if you haven't, if you want to know more about Kang and more about Immortus and just read a really good Avengers story, pick this up. I don't think it's not nearly as dated as Crisis on Infinite Earths is.
No, certainly not. But it's also 15 years newer.
Yeah, no, I mean it absolutely is. But I mean, if you got through Crisis on Infinite Earths, you'll have absolutely no problem writing this. The art is brilliant, and it's really kind of a cool retrospective of like Kang and Immortus and just what makes the Avengers a great superhero team. So
legit.
Read it. Do it. Just
awesome.
do it.
So
do it.
Recommendations?
Yeah.
You want me to start?
Go for it.
I'm nervous.
I
brought something that's not even remotely connected to anything. I brought Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi, which is basically it's done in black and white, and it's the story of Marjane Satrapi as she grows up in revolutionary Iran, and as a young girl, her parents send her to Europe because they can kind of. Her parents are intellectuals, and they realize what's going to happen.
This is pre-Iranian revolutionary.
Yes, this is during. So she leaves as it's starting,
okay,
and she comes back as an adult, and it's already been what is it called? The society, the
Revolution?
No, that they implemented. The revolution was about
Theocracy?
yes, but there's a specific term for it, isn't it? Something. It's a law. Something.
Oh, Sharia.
Yeah, Sharia law.
Yeah.
Right? Like, after the whole theocracy, she comes back after they've won, and Sharia law has been established, and it's kind of her talking about it, her experiences during this time period, but being abroad in Europe, and and coming back, and it's really powerful. It's amazingly well written. I think that
This is a very highly critically acclaimed work.
Absolutely, and they turned it into an animated work as well, which is also excellent. The beautiful thing about this book to me is that I think a lot of it, along with Mouse, it avoids the word just fucking flew away. Being overly
preachy.
like nostalgic, or what's that word? It begins with an S. Wait,
Saccharine?
no, it's like saccharine. It's where you get fuck, man. It's like right on the tip of my fucking tongue. I was just gonna say it. It's where you're too close to something and you get
Sentimental?
Yes, thank you. Oh my god, that word, I was about to say it and it flew away from my brain. It avoids sentimentality, while retaining a lot of like the emotionally rich and emotionally difficult stuff that she goes through. It really is a beautiful story. I love her artwork. It's simple. It's done in black and white. I love the depiction of her in this book. She's a ball buster.
It's got a very simple style.
Yeah. She was a, not understudy, but, she studied with, I think, David B., who's also a graphic artist who does graphic novels. I think.
Like an assistant?
Well, yeah. Like, basically under his tutelage is my understanding of it.
Okay.
And he's done several independent graphic works. And of course, I can't think of, all the names of them are escaping me, but I'll throw them up on the...
This is a dimension of independent comics that I'm really not super familiar with.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting once you start looking into it. I will throw it up on the Facebook page when I remember it, because his work is actually really good. And if you like Persepolis, you will like his stuff too, even though his stuff is, I think, a little bit emotionally more fraught. But yeah, Persepolis is my pick for this week. And
Awesome. Cade, what did you bring?
All right, so following along with the vein, so Joe said his has nothing to do with what we just read. Mine has nothing to do with what we just read, with the exception of it's also dense. And that is V for Vendetta.
Damn.
Hasn't been pitched before, and we also had no V's on the website for recommended reading.
That's true. We didn't.
Jesus Christ.
Man, you two with your your dense black and white comics.
Hey, mine is...
Or V for Vendetta has a little bit of color, doesn't it? I flipped through it one time, and I recall it being very sketchy and very black and white.
I'm trying to remember. I was just reading the first couple
Chard's going
issues.
to get mad at me because I used the word sketchy again.
Yeah. I'm going to say this because he's not here. Language is fluid.
Fair enough. So I'm sorry to interrupt you, Cade.
No, I remember reading, or I read it a little bit, not this past week, but the week before, and I seem to remember there was some color. I don't remember if pages were actually full color or if it was just some panels, but
I know
that there was some color.
V for Vendetta is in color. From Hell is Eddie Campbell, and I think that's more sparsely colored and much more
maybe
sketchy,
that's what
which
I'm
I think
thinking
is
of.
that's what I think you're thinking of. Eddie Campbell's art style is very similar to Matt Kint's art style. They both draw with a very loose hand, and they're very much more expressive with
That's fair.
with their
There
art
you go.
style.
So for those that don't know, this is Alan Moore's V for Vendetta.
This is essentially like 80s Thatcher's Britain turned into dystopic future.
Yes.
It's Alan Moore talking about a dystopian future. Oh my God. Who would have ever thunk it?
Exactly. It's got some history with the whole Guy Fawkes Parliament attempted bombing of whatever.
The gunpowder plot where Guy
Yeah.
Fawkes famously tried to blow up Parliament with, I believe, the King of England at that point in it. And he was caught and executed.
Executed.
And if you've never seen the V for Vendetta movie, this is where the Guy Fawkes mask that Anonymous uses originated from.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's this character V kind of cutting a bloody swath against totalitarian British leadership, whatever.
I should just have you pitch all my books. You're so much better at this than I am. But yeah,
I don't mean to rain on your parade.
no, that's fine. You said it much better than I could.
I've never actually read it. I'm just quoting what I remember about the movie.
Yeah,
Which
no.
Alan Moore would, like, if he heard me saying this, he would cast a spell on me.
I haven't read the whole book before. The book has some major differences, but that's pretty much.
It is a phenomenal movie. Like it.
I don't care what Alan Moore says. I thought that it was a really good movie.
Well, Hugo Weaving
Yeah, right?
and Natalie Portman.
Mm-hmm.
That's very heteronormative of you, Joe.
Chard, edit that out.
And that. Wait, and this.
No, you're making it too complicated. Just edit this out and what Kate just said,
Okay,
and this thing that I'm saying just right
Stop
now,
it. Stop it.
and what Toby just said.
Okay, do you have anything
And this.
else that you want to say about V for Vendetta?
No, that's my pitch.
Okay.
Uh,
I have also brought a black and white indie book.
Oh my God, I'm fucking done. Fuck you guys. Podcast over.
Unfortunately, you don't have the ability to end this podcast.
God damn it.
You're here forever. I brought Finder by Carla Speed McNeil. And this is an indie book from the mid to late 90s, although it's still ongoing at this point. And it's set in the distant post-apocalyptic future, like 600-700 years. And it's about this guy named Jaeger, he's like part Native American, and he is part of a group called the Finders. And all they do is if somebody asks them for help finding something, they have to help them. Like whether it's a person or like a thing, or they need to like, I need to do this thing. Can you help me like find my way to doing that? They kind of help them out. And it's a really kind of weird, interesting setting because it mostly takes place inside this old domed city where there are like all these different clans that kind of wrestle for control of the city, and they have a very regimented they live very regimented lives where they're like they are part of their clan, they don't interact with other clans, like they're very aggressive towards each other. And he meets up with this family that he's known for a while, where it's this woman and her 3 daughters. And they ran away from her abusive husband, who was sent to prison. And he's gotten out of prison, and he's looking for them. And Jaeger is kind of like trying to keep them away from him. And it's really weird and really imaginative. It's a cool story. It's sort of... The first volume is kind of hard to take in. It changes pace in a very sudden way that you can't exactly follow your first time through. Although there was a very helpful index at the back that explained a lot that I definitely recommend you check out. Kind of like as you're reading it, if there's something that you don't understand, flip to the back and look at the index, and there'll probably be a note that goes like, okay, this is the thing in the world that explains why this thing is happening. So I borrowed it from a friend of mine. I've been reading it the past week. It's really interesting. It's a lot of fun. It's very imaginative. And I'm going to pitch the first 2 trades, which are Sin Eater Volume 1 and 2, which are, I'm not sure if they're just 100% out of print because McNeil printed this under her own, basically, like press that she invented. But you can pick up a Dark Horse Library edition called The Finder Library, Volume 1, that has the first 4 volumes. I'm only suggesting that we read the first half of that. But you can pick up the library edition off of like Amazon or something for under $20. So it's pretty easy to pick up. And that is Finder.
All right, gents.
Joe, what are you going to vote for?
I'm going to vote for Finder.
Cade?
Persepolis.
Well, unfortunately, I can't vote for Finder because it's my own book. So I'm going to vote for V for Vendetta.
Oh, that's it. We have a time. Podcast over. Shard abandoned us, and this is what happens. We now have to shoot each other.
Yeah, he should have been here. This is all his fault.
He's going to come in and find her. Well, his corpse, his bloody, half-eaten corpse will reanimate in a few days, and he'll find our bloody, uneaten corpses here, and he'll have to clean that up, and that'll probably bum him out.
I'll change my vote to Finder.
Are you sure? I'll vote for Persepolis.
Yeah, you don't have to change your vote. He's the tiebreaker.
Okay.
I did accept this role, so
Okay.
I am going to break the tie. I will vote for Persepolis. That is what we are going to read for next episode.
Excellent.
And I will just have to put Finder back on the pile of many, many excellent books that I've pitched, and you fucking
I voted
Pharisees.
for it. I fucking voted for it.
Yes, but just like all our books, we expect you to bring them back.
No, I will.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And
Next
I'd
week.
actually like to have an Alan Moore discussion in general. Because I don't necessarily know that, with the exception of top 10, what I could say about one of his books, I could pretty easily say about all of his books, I feel. But I'm not interested. Maybe we can get some other people in here to talk about that, because I'm just not super interested in Alan Moore.
I think that you should bring back V for Vendetta.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Fuck Joe.
I think that you should bring it back, and I'll vote for it to shut Toby up.
That will never happen.
But yeah,
All right.
and also we kind of switched up our format a little bit tonight. We tried to kind of structure our comments a little differently because we're trying to evolve with comments we've gotten and stuff. So let us know how you felt about it, if you felt we had a fruitful discussion, because I feel we did. I feel we had a really fruitful discussion.
I absolutely agree.
So, we love you guys, and we want to keep you happy without sacrificing any of the stuff that you like to hear, like me telling Toby he's wrong. And I didn't get to do that much in this episode, but I promise to do it twice as much next time.
And you will be twice as incorrect when you do.
Whatever. All
right. So next week, Persepolis.
Persepolis.
Bye, guys.
Guys, have a good week.
We love you.
Thank you for listening to Me from the Gutters. I hope our recommendations have inspired you to go out and find some new comics you'll enjoy. Join us next time for a discussion of our selected title, but like every week, we encourage you to read all of the recommended books. In the meantime, please leave us an iTunes review. It really does help new listeners find the show. You can also like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube, and follow us on Twitter at ViewFRTHGutters. Feel free to email us at contact@viewfromthegutters.com. Please send us any questions, comments, or recommendations you might have. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel as we post new videos every week. And thanks again for listening. And as always, keep reading.